WTF Bach podcast. Today, you're listening to the WTF Bach podcast.
And now here's WTF Bach.
It's WTF Bach. Evan Shinners. I read sometimes literature on this podcast. I've done that maybe a half dozen times. I'm always a bit trepidatious about that because it often has very little to do with Johann Sebastian Bach. So I ask my listeners, do you enjoy this? Do you want more of this? I have yet to receive a response saying, please stop reading to us and just stick to Johann. So I'm going to read to you today. There is a short story that I would like you to hear. I want to make sure you have time to enjoy all of it, so I will take a few episodes to get through it. Otherwise, I think this entire story might be over an hour if I were to read it straight. So just a few chapters at a time while my new life emerges from the rubble. Isak Dinesen, I-S-A-K, Dinesen, D-I-N-E-S-E-N. Not her real name. Karen Blixen is her real name. If you grew up without the internet, you probably were involved in her cultural influence somehow, because her most famous work was a novel called Out of Africa that was made into a famous movie with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. Karen Blixen, what an interesting life. Born in Denmark in 1885, she married a baron, Baron Bror Blixen. It's quite a strong name, by the way, Baron Bror Blixen, 3 Bs. Anyone thinking of naming their son Bror these days? They moved to British East Africa, where they owned a coffee plantation. They divorced, and she had to manage the plantation by herself for 10 years until the coffee market collapsed, and she was forced to move back to Denmark in 1931. She took up writing at the age of 46, for those younger writers out there who are younger than 46 and still dreaming of becoming a writer, and she earned success. She became part of the cultural milieu. There's a lovely picture with her and Igor Stravinsky. She traveled to the USA once, where she was hosted by John Steinbeck. She met E.E. Cummings, Pearl S. Buck. She was serenaded by Maria Callas. She met Marilyn Monroe when Marilyn Monroe was married to Arthur Miller. This is a quote from Wikipedia. Throughout the trip, Blixen played upon her crafted persona as a reclusive aristocrat and an outsider, but also that of an eccentric who would eat only oysters and grapes and drink only champagne. But really, she was quite ill. She died in 1962, aged 77. But enough biography. The story I want to read to you is a great story. In fact, it's called The Immortal Story. Now, for the Orson Welles fans out there, and I know there are many of you, you may know that he made a film out of this story. Not a great film, in my opinion, but what you sense from this film is Welles' intense respect for Isak Dinesen's work. Welles actually planned on filming an anthology of her stories, I think 4 or so in total, but completed only this one story and a few scenes from another one. But yes, fascinating woman, wonderful artist, Karen Blixen, Isak Dinesen. She had, I think, another nom de plume, Pierre Andrezel, but it's all her. It's all Blixen. And this story, it's lovely, really. Some stories within other stories, but this entire thing, the Immortal Story, is a piece of wonder now. No need to tell you what it's all about, as if you listen, you'll soon find out. So here we go, The Immortal Story by Isak Dinesen. 1. Mr. Clay. In the 60s of the last century, there lived in Canton an immensely rich tea trader whose name was Mr. Clay. He was a tall, dry, and close old man. He had a magnificent house and a splendid equipage, and he sat in the midst of both, erect, silent, and alone. Amongst the other Europeans of Canton, Mr. Clay had the name of an iron-hard man and a miser. People kept away from him. His looks, voice, and manner, more than anything actually known against him, had made him this reputation. All the same, 2 or 3 stories about him, many times repeated, seemed to bear out the general opinion of the man. One of the stories ran as follows. 15 years ago, a French merchant, who at one time had been Mr. Clay's partner, but later, after a quarrel between them, had started on his own, was ruined by unlucky speculations. As a last chance, he tried to get a consignment of tea on board the clipper Thermopylae, which lay in the harbor ready to go under way. But he owed Mr. Clay the sum of 300 guineas, and his creditor laid hands on the tea, got his own shipment of the tea off with the Thermopylae, and by this move finally ruined his rival. The Frenchman lost all. His house was sold, and he was thrown upon the streets with his family. When he saw no way out of his misfortune, he committed suicide. The French merchant had been a talented, genial man. He had a lovely wife and a big family. Now that, in the eyes of his friends, he was contrasted with the stony figure of Mr. Clay, he began to shine with the halo of gay and gentle rays, and they started a collection of money for his widow. But owing to the rivalry between the French and English communities of Canton, it did not come to much, and after a short time the French lady and her children disappeared from the horizon of their acquaintances. Mr. Clay took over the dead man's house, a big, beautiful villa with a large garden in which peacocks strutted on the lawns. He was living in it today. In the course of time, this story had taken the character of a myth. Monsieur Dupont, it was told, on the last day of his life, had called together his pretty, gentle wife and his bright young children. Since all their misery, he declared, had risen from the moment when he first set eyes on the face of Mr. Clay, he now bound them by a solemn vow never, in any place or under any circumstance, to look into that face again. It was also told that when he had been about to leave his house, of which he was very proud, he had burnt or smashed every object of art in it, asserting that no thing made for the embellishment of life would ever consent to live with the new master of the house. But he had left in all the rooms the tall, gilt-framed looking-glasses brought out from France, which till now had reflected only gay and affectionate scenes, with the words that it should be his murderer's punishment to meet, wherever he went, a portrait of the hangman. Mr. Clay settled in the house and sat down to dine in solitude, face to face with his portrait. It is doubtful whether he was ever aware of the lack of friendliness in his surroundings, for the idea of friendliness had never entered into his scheme of life. If things had been left entirely to himself, he would have arranged them in the same way. It was only natural that he should believe them to be as they were because he had willed them to be so. Slowly in his career as a nabob, Mr. Clay had come to have faith in his own omnipotence. Other great merchants of Canton held the same faith in regard to themselves, and, like Mr. Clay, kept it up by ignoring the part of the world which lay outside the sphere of their power. By the time that Mr. Clay was 70 years old, he fell ill with the gout, and for a long time was almost paralyzed. The pain was so severe that he could not sleep at nights, and his nights then seemed infinitely long. Late one night, it happened that one of Mr. Clay's young clerks came to his house with a pile of accounts that he had been revising. The old man in his bed heard him talk to the servants. He sent for him and made him go through the account books with him. When the morning came, he found that this night had passed less slowly than the others, so the next evening he again sent for the young clerk, and again made him read out his books to him. From this time it became an established rule that the young man should make his appearance in the huge, richly furnished bedroom by 9 o'clock, to sit by his old employer's bedside and read out by the light of a candle the bills, contracts, and estimates of Mr. Clay's business. He had a sonorous voice, but toward morning it would grow a little hoarse. This vexed Mr. Clay, who in his young days had had sharp ears, but now was getting hard of hearing. He told his clerk that he was paying him to do work, and that, if he could not do it well, he would dismiss him and take on another reader. When the two of them had come to the end of the books now in use at the office, the old man sighed and turned his head on the pillow. The clerk thought the matter over. He went to the lockers and took out books 5, 10, and 15 years old, and these he read out, word for word, during the hours of the night. Mr. Clay listened attentively. The reading brought back to him schemes and triumphs of the past, but the nights were long. In the course of time, the reader ran short even of such old books, and had to read the same things over again. One morning, when the young man had for the third time gone through a deal of 20 years ago and was about to go home to bed himself, Mr. Clay held him back and seemed to have something on his mind. The workings of his master's mind were always of great moment to the clerk. He stayed on a little to give the old man time to find the words for what he wanted. After a while, Mr. Clay asked him, reluctantly, and as if himself uneasy and doubtful, whether he had not heard of other kinds of books. The clerk answered, no, he had no knowledge of other kinds of books, but he would find them if Mr. Clay would explain to him what he meant. Mr. Clay, in the same hesitating manner, told him that he had in mind books and accounts, not of deals or bargains, but of other things which people at times had put down, and which other people did at times read. The clerk reflected upon the matter and repeated, no, he had never heard of such books. Here the talk ended, and the clerk took his leave. On his way home, the young man turned Mr. Clay's question over in his mind. He felt that it had been uttered out of some deep need, half against the speaker's own will, with bashfulness and even with shame. If the clerk had himself had any sense of shame in his nature, he might have left his old employer at that, and have wiped his one slip from dignity off his memory. But since he had nothing in this quality in him, he began to ponder the matter. The demand surely was a symptom of weakness in the old man. It might even be a foreboding of death. What would be, he reflected, the consequence to him himself of such a state of things? 2. Elishama. The young clerk who had been reading to Mr. Clay was known to the other accountants of the office as Ellis Lewis, but this was not his real name. He was named Elishama Levinsky. He had given himself a new name, not like some other people in those days emigrating to China, in order to cover up any trespass or crime of his own. He had done it to obliterate crimes committed against himself, and a past of hard trials. He was a Jew and had been born in Poland. His people had all been killed in the big pogrom of 1848, at a time when he himself had been, he believed, 6 years old. Other Polish Jews who managed to escape had happened to carry him with them among other sad and ragged bundles. Since that time, like some little parcel of goods in small demand, he had been carried and dropped, set against a wall and forgotten, and after a while once more flung about. A lost and lonely child, wholly in the hands of chance, he had gone through strange sufferings in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon. Things not to be recounted and hardly to be recalled still moved like a big deep-water fish in the depths of his dark mind. In London, chance had put him in the hands of an ingenious old Italian bookkeeper who had taught him to read and write, and who had, before he died, in 1 year implanted in him as much knowledge of bookkeeping by double entry as other people will acquire in 10 years. Later the boy was lifted up and shifted eastward, where in the end he was set down in Mr. Clay's office in Canton. Here he sat by his desk, like a tool ground upon the grindstone to life to an exceedingly sharp edge, with eyes and ears like a lynx, and without any illusions whatever of the world or of humanity. With this equipment, Elishama might have made a career for himself, and might have been a highly dangerous person to meet and deal with. But it was not so, and the reason for the apparently illogical state of things was the total lack of ambition in the boy's own soul. Desire in any form had been washed, bleached, and burnt out of him before he had learned to read. To look at, he was a fairly ordinary young man, small, slim, and very dark, with veiled brown eyes, and might have passed as a citizen of any nation. Mentally he had nothing of a youth, but all of a precious child or a very old man. He had no softness or fullness in him, no yearning for love or adventure, no sense of competition, no fear, and no wish to fight. Outwardly and inwardly he was like some kind of insect, an ant, hard to crush even to the heel of a boot. One passion he had, if passion it may be called, a fanatical craving for security and for being left alone. In its nature, this feeling was akin to homesickness or to the instinct of the homing pigeon. His soul was concentrated upon this one request, that he might enter his closet and shut his door with the certainty that here no one could possibly follow or disturb him. The closet which he entered and to which he shut the door was a modest place, a small dark room in a narrow street. Here he slept on an old sofa rented from his landlady, but in the room there were few objects which did really belong to him. A painted, ink-stained table, 2 chairs, and a chest. These objects to their owner were of great significance. Sometimes in the night he would light a small candle to lie and gaze at them, as if they proved to him that the world was still fairly safe. He would also at night draw comfort from the idea of the numerical series. He went over its figures, 10, 20, 7,000, They were all there, and he went to sleep. Elishama, who despised the goods of this world, passed his time from morning till night amongst greedy and covetous people, and had done so all his life. This to him was as it should be. He understood to a nicety the feelings of his surroundings, and he approved of them. For out of those feelings came, in the end, his closet with the door to it. If the world's desperate struggle for gold and power were ever to cease, it was not certain that his room or this door would remain. So he used his talents to fan and stir up the fire of ambition and greed in people round him. He particularly fanned the fire with Mr. Clay's ambition and greed, and watched it with an attentive eye. Even before the time of their nocturnal readings, there had existed between Mr. Clay and Elishama a kind of relation, a rare thing to both of them. It had first begun when Elishama had drawn Mr. Clay's attention to the fact that he was being cheated by the people who bought horses for him. Some unknown ancestor of Elishama's had been a horse dealer to Polish princes and magnates, and the young bookkeeper in Canton had all this old Jew's knowledge of horses in his blood. He would not for anything in the world have been the owner of a horse himself, but he encouraged Mr. Clay's vanity about his carriage and pair, from which, in the end, his own security might benefit. Mr. Clay, on his side, had been struck by the young man's insight and judgment. He had left the superintendence of his stable to him, and never been disappointed. They had no other direct dealings, but Mr. Clay had become aware of Elishama's excellence, as Elishama had for a long time been aware of Mr. Clay's. The relationship showed itself in a particular way. It might have been observed that neither of the two ever spoke about the other to anybody else. In both the old and the young man, this was a breach of habit, for Mr. Clay constantly fretted over his young staff to his overseers, and Elishama had such a sharp tongue that his remarks about the great and small merchants of Canton had become proverbial in the storehouses and the offices. In this way the master and the servant seemed to be standing back to back, facing the rest of the world, and did indeed, unknowingly, behave exactly as they would have behaved had they been father and son. In his own room, Elishama now thought of Mr. Clay, and put him down as a greater fool than he had held him to be. But after a time he rose to make a cup of tea, a luxury which he permitted himself when he came back from his nightly readings, and while he drank it, his mind began to move in a different way. He took up Mr. Clay's question for serious consideration. It was possible, he reflected, that such books as Mr. Clay had asked about did really exist. He was accustomed to getting Mr. Clay the things he wanted. If these books existed, he must look out for them, and even if they were rare, he would find them in the end. Elishama sat for a long time with his chin in his hand, then stood up and went to the chest in the corner of the room. Out of it he took a smaller red-painted box, which, when he first came to Canton, had contained all that he owned in the world. He looked through it carefully and came upon an old yellow piece of paper folded up and preserved in a small silk bag. He read it by the candle on the table. 3. The Prophecy of Isaiah. In the party of Jews who, in their flight from Poland, had taken Elishama with them, there had been a very old man who had died on the way. Before he died, he gave the child the piece of paper in the red bag. Elishama tied it round his neck and managed to keep it there for many years, mainly because during this time he rarely undressed. He could not read and did not know what was written on it. But when in London he learned to read and was told that people set a value on written matter, he took out his paper and found it to be written in letters different from those he had been taught. His master from time to time sent him on an errand to a dark and dirty little pawnshop, the owner of which was an unfrocked clergyman. Elishama took the paper to this man and asked him if it meant anything. When he was informed that it was written in Hebrew, he suggested that the pawnbroker should translate it for him for a fee of 3 pence. The old man read the paper through and recognized its contents. He looked them up in their own place, copied them out in English, and gravely accepted the 3 pence. The boy, from now on, kept both the original and the translation in his small red bag. In order to help Mr. Clay, Elishama now took the bag from his box. Under other circumstances he would not have done so, for it brought with it notions of darkness and horror and the dim picture of a friend. Elishama did not want friends any more than Mr. Clay did. They were to him people who suffered and perished. The word itself meant separation and loss. tears and blood dripped from it. Thus it came about that a few nights later, when Elishama had finished reading the accounts to Mr. Clay, and the old man growled and prepared to send him off, the clerk took from his pocket a small, dirty sheet of paper and said, "Here, Mr. Clay, is something that I shall read to you." Mr. Clay turned his pale eyes to the reader's face. Elishama read out, "The wilderness and the solitary places shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly, and sing even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it." "What is that?" Mr. Clay asked angrily. Elishama laid down his paper. "That, Mr. Clay," he said, "is what you have asked for. Something besides the account books, which people have put together and written down." He continued, "The excellency of Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of the Lord, and the excellency of our God. Strengthen ye the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them—" "What is it? Where did you get it?" Mr. Clay asked again. Elishama held up his hand to impose silence, and read, "Say to them that are of fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water, and the habitation of dragons, where each lay, shall be grass with reeds and rushes." When Elishama had got so far, he laid down his paper and looked straight in front of him. Mr. Clay drew in his breath asthmatically. "What was all that?" he asked. "I have told you, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. "You have heard it. This is a thing which a man has put together and written down." "Has it happened?" asked Mr. Clay. "No," answered Elishama with deep scorn. "Is it happening now?" said Mr. Clay. "No," said Elishama in the same way. After a moment, Mr. Clay asked, "Who on earth has put it together?" Elishama looked at Mr. Clay and said, "The prophet Isaiah." "Who is that?" Mr. Clay asked sharply. "The prophet? Pooh, what is a prophet?" Elishama said, "A man who foretells things." "Then all these things should come to happen," Mr. Clay remarked disdainfully. Elishama did not want to disavow the prophet Isaiah. He said, "Yes, but not now." After a while, Mr. Clay ordered, "Read again that of the lame man." Elishama read, "Then the lame man shall leap as a hart." After a moment, Mr. Clay ordered, "And that of the feeble knees." "And confirm the feeble knees," Elishama read. "And of the deaf," said Mr. Clay. "And the ears of the deaf," said Elishama, "shall be unstopped." There was a long pause. "Is anybody doing anything to make these things happen?" asked Mr. Clay. "No," said Elishama with even deeper contempt than before. When, after another pause, Mr. Clay took up the matter, Elishama, by the tone of his voice, realized that he was now wide awake. "Read the whole thing over again," he commanded. Elishama did as he was told. When he had finished, Mr. Clay asked, "When did the prophet Isaiah live?" "I do not know, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. "I think that it will have been about 1,000 years ago." Mr. Clay's knees were at this moment hurting badly, and he was painfully aware of his lameness and infirmity. "It is a foolish thing," he declared, "to foretell things which did not begin to take place within 1,000 years. People," he added slowly, "should record things which have already happened." "Do you want me," Elishama asked, "to take out the books of accounts once more?" There was a very long pause. "No," Mr. Clay said. "No, people can record things which have already happened outside of account books. I know what such a record is called. A story. I have heard a story myself. Do not disturb me, and I shall remember it." "When I was 20 years old," he said after another long silence, "I sailed from England to China, and I heard this story on the night before we touched the Cape of Good Hope. Now, I remember it all well. It was a warm night, the sea was calm, and there was a full moon. I had been sitting for some time by myself on the afterbody when 3 sailors came up and sat down on the deck. They were so close to me that I could hear all that they said, but they did not see me. One of the sailors told the others a story. He recorded them things which had happened to him himself. I heard the story from beginning to the end, and I shall tell it to you. 4. The story. The sailor, Mr. Clay began, had once come ashore in a big town. I do not remember which, but it does not matter. He was walking by himself in a street near the harbor when a fine, costly carriage drove up to him, and an old gentleman descended from it. The gentleman said to the sailor, "You are a fine-looking sailor. Do you want to earn 5 guineas tonight?" Mr. Clay was so completely unaccustomed to telling a story that it is doubtful whether he could have gone on with this one except in the dark. He continued with an effort and repeated, "Do you want to earn 5 guineas tonight?" Elishama here put the prophecy of Isaiah back into its bag and into his pocket. The sailor, Mr. Clay related, naturally answered yes. The rich gentleman then told him to come with him and drove him in his carriage to a big and splendid house just outside the town. Within the house everything was equally grand and sumptuous. The sailor had never believed that such riches existed in the world, for how would a poor boy like him ever have come inside a really great man's house? The gentleman gave him a fine meal and expensive wine, and the sailor recounted all that he had had to eat and drink, but I have forgotten the names of the courses and the wines. When they had finished his meal, the master of the house said to the sailor, "I am, as you see, a very rich man, the richest man in this town, but I am old. I have not many years left, and I dislike and distrust the people who will inherit what I have collected and saved up in life. 3 years ago I married a young wife, but she has been no good to me, for I have no child." Here Mr. Clay made a pause to collect his thoughts. "With your permission," said Elishama, "I too can tell that story." "What is that?" exclaimed Mr. Clay, very angry at the interruption. "I shall tell you the rest of that story, with your permission, if you will listen, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. Mr. Clay did not find a word to say, and Elishama went on. The old gentleman, he recounted, led the sailor to a bedroom which was lighted by candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left. Was it not so, Mr. Clay? On the walls were carved pictures of palm trees. In the room there was a bed, and a partition was made by chains of gold before the bed, and in the bed lay a lady. The old man said to this lady, "You know my wish. Now do your best to have it carried out." Then from his purse he took a piece of gold, a 5-guinea piece, Mr. Clay, and handed it to the sailor, and after that he left the room. The sailor stayed with the lady all night, but when the day began to spring, the door of the house was opened to him by the old man's servant, and he left the house and went back to his ship. Was it not so, Mr. Clay? Mr. Clay for a minute stared at Elishama, then asked, "How do you come to know this story? Have you too met the sailor from the ship near the Cape of Good Hope? He will be an old man by now. These things happened to him many years ago." "That story, Mr. Clay," said Elishama, "which you believe to have happened to the sailor on your ship, has never happened to anyone. All sailors know it, all sailors tell it, and each of them, because he wishes that it happened to him himself, tells it as if it were so. But it is not so. All sailors, when they listen to the story, like to have it told in that way. The sailor who tells it may vary it a little and add a few things of his own, as when he explains how the lady was made and how in the night he made love to her, but otherwise the story is always the same." The old man in the bed at first did not say a word. Then in a voice hoarse with anger and disappointment, he asked, "How do you know?" "I shall tell you, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. "You have traveled on one ship only out here to China, so you have heard this story only once, but I have sailed with many ships. First I sailed from Gravesend to Lisbon, and on the ship a sailor told the story tonight which you have told me. I was very young then, so I almost believed it, but not quite. Then I sailed from Lisbon to the Cape of Good Hope, and on the ship there was a sailor who told it. Then I sailed to Singapore, and on my way I again heard a sailor tell the story. It is the story of all sailors in the world. Even the phrases and the words are the same, but all sailors are pleased when, once more, one of them begins to tell it." "Why should they tell it," said Mr. Clay, "if it were not true?" Elishama thought the question over. "I shall explain that to you," he said, "if you will listen. All people, Mr. Clay, in one respect, are the same. When a new financial scheme is offered for subscription, it is proved on paper that the shareholders will make on it 100% or 200%, as the case may be. Such a profit is never made, and everybody knows that it is never made. Still, people must see these figures on paper in the issue of stocks, or they will have nothing to do with the scheme. It is the same, Mr. Clay, with the prophecy which I have read to you. The prophet Isaiah, who told it, will, I believe, have been living in a country where it rained too little. Therefore he tells you the parched ground becomes a pool. In England, where the ground is almost always a pool, people do not care to write it down or read about it. The sailors of this story, Mr. Clay, are poor men and lead a lonely life on the sea. That is why they tell about the rich house and the beautiful lady, but the story which they tell has never happened. Mr. Clay said, "The sailor told the others that he held a 5-guinea piece on his hand, and that he felt the weight and the cold of the gold upon it." "Yes, Mr. Clay," said Elishama, "and do you know why he told them so? It was because he knew, and because the other sailors knew, that such a thing could never happen. If they had believed that it could ever happen, they would not have told it. A sailor goes ashore from his ship and pays a woman in the street to let him come with her. Sometimes he pays her 10 shillings, sometimes 5, sometimes only 2, and none of these women are young or beautiful or rich. It might possibly happen, although I myself doubted, that a woman would let a sailor come with her for nothing. But if she did so, Mr. Clay, the sailor would never tell. Here a sailor will tell you that a young, beautiful, and rich lady, such a lady as he may have seen at a distance, but has never spoken to, has been paying him for the same thing, 5 guineas. In the story, Mr. Clay, it is always 5 guineas. That is contrary to the law of demand and supply, Mr. Clay, and it never has happened, and it never will happen, and that is why it is told." Mr. Clay, at this moment, was so upset, puzzled, and angry that he could not speak. He was angry with Elishama because he felt that his clerk was taking advantage of his weakness and was defying his authority. But he was upset and puzzled by the prophet Isaiah, who was about to annihilate his whole world and him himself with it. The two of them, he felt, were holding together against him. After a while he spoke. His voice was harsh and grating, but as firm as when he was giving an order in his office. "If this story," he said, "has never happened before, I shall make it happen now. I do not like pretense, I do not like prophecies. It is insane and immoral to occupy oneself with unreal things. I like facts. I shall turn this piece of make-believe into solid fact." The old man, when he had spoken, was a little easier at heart. He felt that he was getting the better of Elishama and the prophet Isaiah. He was still going to prove to them his omnipotence. "This story shall become reality," he said very slowly. "One sailor in the world shall tell it from beginning to end, with everything that is in it as actually, from beginning to end, happened to him." When Elishama walked home in the morning, he said to himself, "Either this old man is going mad and nearing his end, or otherwise he will tomorrow be ashamed of his project of tonight and will want to forget it, and it will be the safest thing not to mention it to him again." 5. The mission of Elishama. Mr. Clay, however, was not ashamed. His project of the night had seized hold of him. The matter had become a trial of strength between him and the insurgents. Next midnight, as the clock struck, he took up the theme and said to Elishama, "Do you think that I can no longer do what I want to do?" This time Elishama did not contradict Mr. Clay with a word. He answered, "No, Mr. Clay, I think you can do whatever you want." Mr. Clay said, "I want the story which I told you last night to happen in real life to real people." "I shall see to it, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. "Where do you want it to happen?" "I want it to happen here," said Mr. Clay, and proudly looked round his big, richly furnished bedroom. "In my house. I want to be present myself, and to see it all with my own eyes. I want to pick up the sailor myself, in the street, by the harbor. I want to dine with him myself, in my dining room." "Yes, Mr. Clay," said Elishama. "And when do you want the story to happen to real people?" "It ought to be done quickly," said Mr. Clay after a pause. "It will have to be done quickly, but I am feeling better tonight. In a week's time I shall be strong enough." "Then," Elishama said, "I shall have everything ready within a week." After a while Mr. Clay said, "It will involve expenses. I do not mind what the expenses may come to." These words gave Elishama such an impression of cold and loneliness in the old man that it was as if they had been spoken from the grave. But since he himself did feel at home in the grave, he and his employer were at this moment brought closer together. "Yes," he said, "it is going to cost us some money, for you will remember that there is a young woman in the story." "Yes, a woman," said Mr. Clay. "The world is full of women. A young woman one can always buy, and that will be the cheapest thing in the story." "No, Mr. Clay," said Elishama, "it will not be the cheapest thing in the story, for if I bring you a woman of the town, the sailor will know her for what she is, and he will lose faith in the story." Mr. Clay growled a little. "And a young miss I shall not be able to get you," said Elishama. "I am paying you to do this work," said Mr. Clay. "It will be part of your work to find me a woman." "I shall have to think it over," said Elishama. But he had already, while they talked together, been thinking it over. Elishama, as has been told, was very well versed in bookkeeping by double entry. He saw Mr. Clay with the eyes of the world, and to the eyes of the world, had the world known of his scheme, the old man was undoubtedly mad. At the same time he saw Mr. Clay with his own eyes, and to his own eyes his employer, with his colleagues in the tea trade and in other trades, had always been mad. And indeed he was not sure whether, to a man with one foot in the grave, the pursuit of a story was not a sounder undertaking than the pursuit of profit. Elishama at any time would side with the individual against the world, since, however mad the individual might be, the world in general was sure to be still more hopelessly and wickedly idiotic. As, once more, he walked away from Mr. Clay's house, he realized that from this moment he was indispensable to his master, and could get out of him whatever he wanted. He did not intend to derive any advantage from the circumstance, but the idea pleased him. In Mr. Clay's office there was a young accountant whose name was Charlie Simpson. He was an ambitious young man, and had resolved to become, in his own lifetime, a millionaire and nabob like Mr. Clay himself. The big, ruddy young gentleman considered himself to be Elishama's only friend, treated him with patronizing joviality, and had lately honored him with his confidence. Charlie kept a mistress in town. Her name was Virginie. She was, he told his protégé, a Frenchwoman of very good family, but she had been ruined by her amorous temperament, and now lived only for passion. Virginie wanted a French shawl. Her lover meant to make her a present of one, but he was afraid to go into a shop to buy it, as somebody might spot him there and report to his father in England. If Elishama would take a collection of shawls to Virginie's house, Charlie would show his gratitude by introducing him to the lady herself. The lovers had had a row immediately before Elishama's arrival with the shawls, but the sight of these somewhat appeased Virginie. She draped one shawl after another round her fine figure before the looking-glass, as if the men had not been in the room, and even lifted her skirts neatly over her knee and made a couple pas de basques. Over her shoulder she told her lover that he must now surely be able to see for himself that her real calling was the theatre. If she could only raise the money, the wisest thing she could do was to go back to France. There, comedy, drama, and tragedy still existed, and the greatest actresses were the idols of a nation. Elishama was not familiar with the words comedy, drama, or tragedy, but an instinct now told him that there was a connection between these phenomena and Mr. Clay's story. The day after his last conversation with Mr. Clay, he turned his steps towards Virginie's house. Within his nature, Elishama had a trait which few people would have expected to find there. He felt a deep innate sympathy or compassion toward all women of this world, and particularly toward all young women. Although, as has already been told, he himself did not want a horse, he could fix to a penny the price of any horse shown him, and although he did not himself in the least want a woman, he could view a woman with the eyes of other young men and accurately determine her value. Only in the latter case he considered the eyes of other young men to be short-sighted or blind, the price to be erroneous, and the article itself in some sad way underestimated and wrong. Mysteriously he felt the same sympathy and compassion toward birds. The quadrupeds all left him indifferent, and horses, in spite of his knowledge and understanding of them, he disliked. But he would take a roundabout way to his office in order to pass the Chinese bird sellers' shops, and to stand for a long time in front of their piled-up bird cages, and he knew the individual birds within them, and followed their fate with concern. Walking along to Virginie's house, he might well feel a twofold sympathy, for she was a young woman who reminded him of a bird. As in his thoughts he compared her to other young women of Canton, she there took on the aspect of a golden pheasant or a peacock in the poultry yard. She was bigger than her sisters, nobler and more pompous of gait and feather, strutting somewhat lonely among the smaller domestic fowl. At their one meeting she had been a little downcast and fretful, like a golden pheasant in the molting season. But she was always a golden pheasant. So, let's stop the Immortal story there. That's about a third of the entire thing. I don't know exactly when, but during our ongoing study of the Well-Tempered Clavier, I will intersperse the rest of this story to your hopeful delight. What do you think about this? Do you like this? Dinesen, are you interested to find out what's going to happen? Stay tuned for the adventures of Elishama and Mr. Clay. But seriously, Isak Dinesen, highly recommended. There's something that reminds me a bit of Borges, whom I've read twice or more on this podcast, especially that part where Elishama goes into to get the prophecy of Isaiah translated in that bookshop. That's just a magical scene. And I've gone back and made sure that I did a proper reading of this text just now, and I did make two mistakes, probably more, but two mistakes that I could count. One is I mispronounced the town Gravesend. I read it like it was some town in Scandinavia, but no, Gravesend is in good old Kent, England. And nabob, N-A-B-O-B, didn't know this term. I pronounced it nabob or something like that, or nabab, but it's a nabob. That's a person who made his fortune in the East, especially with the East India Trading Company. As for Isak Dinesen, I assume you can contain your excitement to see how the Immortal story unfolds, but if you need a Blixen injection urgently, two short stories I would recommend. Babette's Feast. Wow, what a story. Babette's Feast. Maybe, just maybe I'll find a way to sneak in a paragraph from Babette's Feast into this podcast about what it is to be an artist, what an artist is. Glorious writing about what it is to be an artist, and in this case, in the case of Babette, a cook. That story and The Diver, which is less direct narrative, rooted somehow, like the Immortal story, in biblical writings. Very interesting. I hope that if you don't know who Isak Dinesen is or was, that your interest is piqued and you are ready to hear the rest of this story. And stay tuned for the Well-Tempered Clavier saga. As usual, thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. I click my heels every time I get a Substack subscriber, and I pirouette 4 times when one of you upgrades to the paid subscription. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got something out of it. I will see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the WTF Bach podcast.
We couldn't make this podcast without the support from listeners like you. Become a paid subscriber on Evan's Substack.
You'll be helping us out tremendously. You can also make a one-time donation on Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal. All relevant links are found in this episode's description.
And we want to hear from you.
So if you have an idea, a favorite piece, or a suggestion, give us a shout at Bach@WTFBach.com. We get notes almost every week from every corner of the globe, and it makes our days to hear from you. So thank you for listening.